it's sort of like the closest thing Maiden have to a Planet Caravan,
Yeah.
but also it's more boring.
Yeah, it is. I mean, yeah.
Hello, and welcome to Maiden Voyages, a podcast where we examine every Iron Maiden album in chronological order. Yes, even the bad ones. We've already fallen at the first hurdle, having not actually covered the debut album in our debut episode. But this week we're picking up where we left off, having covered all the things that happened to Iron Maiden before they made Iron Maiden, by Iron Maiden.
It's going to happen, Sam. We are going to talk about the debut album.
Cool. Well, my name is Sam Carnicker. I am a writer for Distorted Sound. And this is my esteemed colleague.
Only we're not colleagues, but fine.
No, but in the context of this, we're colleagues.
My name's Blev. Hello. I like Iron Maiden.
You have more credentials than that.
But yeah, okay, but
we can't do this every week.
Sorry. Hello, I'm Blev, and I have a PhD because I'm very clever.
Cool, I like that. That works. I mean, I just want your LinkedIn CV, but that'll work.
Excellent. I'll email it to you.
Great. Now, Blevin is gonna. Well, I'm sure you have some opinions about the debut.
Well, yeah, but before we get to the debut, which we will get to, but before we
get to an album,
before we do that, the artwork.
Well, that counts as a debut.
Yeah. Okay. So let's look at the artwork in the debut album. So it's an illustration by Derek Riggs. So this is the beginning of a
very long relationship.
Yeah,
right?
And almost unique in heavy metal, really, for one artist to define the image of a band so much as Derek Riggs has defined the image of Iron Maiden, really.
Yeah.
Just the length of the collaboration. What struck me as interesting about the debut album is that this isn't a piece Iron Maiden commissioned. So Derek Riggs had this drawing.
Right.
It was part of a portfolio of work he'd done, because he's basically just a semi-working artist doing his comic book, sci-fi, fantasy type drawings. And originally he had this drawing and he earmarked it for the cover of a sci-fi novel.
Right.
So he'd been hawking these images out to publishers who publish sci-fi, going, oh look, maybe this would be good for a cover. Not getting anything back. Somehow Rod Smallwood sees his work.
It's always Rod.
It is always Rod, isn't it? I think actually he'd done a poster for another band and Rod liked it and thought, oh, who's that guy? Rod gets in touch with Derek, has a look at his work, and comes across the image we have in front of us.
Right.
Which eventually becomes the cover of Iron Maiden by Iron Maiden. Although there was one change that the band asked Derek to make to the original image. Can you think what that change was? This isn't another quiz. Well, this is a quiz. Why not? It's Be Quiz or Be Dead. Impromptu Be Quiz or Be Dead.
Yeah, okay, and this is a hard one. I have no idea. Maybe it's to make the hair longer?
Spot on. Points to that man.
It's almost like heavy metal's predictable.
Indeed. Well, the original Eddie, although presumably to Derek Riggs he wasn't Eddie, he was just a monstrous... Edward. Well, he was just a monstrous figure, because Iron Maiden already had the Eddie the Ed mascot from their backdrop, the blood spearing, as discussed in the previous episode. So Rod and the band saw it and thought, that's Eddie, okay? But he had shorter hair. He was more of a punk type figure.
Right.
And as we established last episode,
Steve Harris hates punk.
He really hates punk, everyone. He can't say that loudly or often enough. He does not like punk. So just to make it clear that Eddie is not a punk, they gave him slightly longer hair.
I mean, he still looks pretty punk, to be honest.
He does look quite punk, actually, doesn't he?
Yeah, it's like a long mohawk.
Yeah. The other thing that's probably worth talking about is the logo. Do you know who designed the Iron Maiden logo?
I had always assumed it was just Steve Harris.
It was Steve Harris. Because
we go.
Steve Harris left school and he apprenticed as a draftsman, so he did technical drawing and stuff. Well, Steve Harris says and maintains he came up with the Iron Maiden logo. I'm just going to ask you now, and the people at home, you play along as well.
Is this the second bit of quiz?
Well, no, this isn't a quiz. Okay. This is, again, me just... I love Steve Harris. I don't want to call him out on things that are categorically wrong.
But you're going
or to call him a liar. But he says he designed the Iron Maiden logo. Can you just Google now, The Man Who Fell to Earth film poster? It's a David Bowie vehicle that came out in the early mid-70s. Have a look at all the various options that are presented to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So For anyone else who Googles this image,
describe what you see,
it is
Sam.
the Iron Maiden font on a black poster.
And would you like to tell me what year that film came out? Partly because I can't remember, but isn't that the IMDb link? Can you have a little look?
1976.
1976.
4 years before Iron Maiden's debut release.
Yeah. So, as I said, Steve Harris designed the Iron Maiden logo that just is suspiciously like...
It is identical.
Yeah.
Like, the only difference is, like, there might be some slight, like, tailings on letters and some stuff around kerning, but it's the same font.
It is the same font, isn't it? So, I don't really know what to make of that.
Well, I'm sure this is not going to be the first time that Steve Harris's account might not line up with reality.
Well, exactly. So, if we're being kind, we could say Steve was subliminally influenced by this and doesn't quite remember seeing this poster. If we're being less kind, the man's a liar. He says he designed the Iron Maiden logo. Is actually what it meant is I saw this really cool font, and it is a cool font, isn't it?
Very cool font.
And again, if they go back to 1980, if you think of other bands, Judas Priest, I guess, have a logo of sorts by this time. But only just. Yeah, but the first few Priest albums, it's not the classic logo. So I'm trying to think when that iconic one, you know, of like the sort of forked tail comes in. But Deep Purple don't really have a logo. You know, it changes from album to album, basically. Led Zeppelin, did they have... Yeah, Led Zeppelin have an iconic font, I guess. But then a lot of their album covers didn't have the logo on it anyway. Yeah,
I mean, Zeppelin were more about those 4 symbols.
Yeah, the 4 symbols.
That was their iconography.
But again, just the idea of having this, you know, like a thematic and stylistic through line to all your art direction.
Priests seem to have had the same logo since Stained Class.
Stained Class, that's what, 77 Stained Class?
78.
78, okay, so not for long, right? So Priest have only put out a couple of albums of that logo, basically, by this point. So it's, you know, with Derek Riggs's artwork, the logo, regardless of the provenance of the logo, that font, there's still this through line to everything Maiden did, which again I think is semi-innovative at least.
Semi-innovative, but then look at Kiss, right? Like that logo is there from day one.
Well, yeah, Kiss are the archetypes, I guess. Yeah,
I mean, Kiss are rock branding 101. Right? Yeah, like that. In terms of setting an image, a defined image for the band, Kiss are doing that from day one.
And certainly, Steve is, like a lot of guys in Iron Maiden, I've not really heard them express that many thoughts about Kiss, but Dennis Wilcock, one of the early singers, was a big Kiss fan. And apparently he's the one who, you know, he brings props, and seemingly a lot of the early Iron Maiden theatricality of the show sort of comes from, you know, Dennis Wilcock, who is now largely forgotten, just a footnote in the history of Iron Maiden. But yeah, and I wonder, you know, maybe there's some influence there. Maybe Steve and Rod,
Rod in
particular is quite savvy, I think, would, you know, be looking to Kiss and bands like that, seeing what they're doing.
Yeah, I would say there's definitely a through line for Iron Maiden's theatricality that comes from Kiss and Alice Cooper.
Yeah.
It's taken in a different place, but those two bands already paved the way for that stuff.
Yeah. So what do you think of it as a cover, bearing in mind this is 1980? It's a striking cover, isn't it? I mean, it looked different to other albums that came out in 1980.
It's an iconic cover. Yeah. Like, there's something to be said for... I mean, yeah, nowadays when we're inundated with zombie-related media, it doesn't stick out. But in the context of 1980, having that quite striking, dishevelled-looking zombie Eddie staring right at you is quite... Like, there's something quite affecting about that.
Yeah, there is. And just that sort of quite simple backdrop, again, looks kind of East Endy, just like... Yeah. Nondescript, dark urban environment. It's quite a menacing. You know, I imagine if you looked at it with 21st century eyes, you'd think it looks very cartoony.
Yeah.
Even, you know, a little bit silly. But I can imagine in 1980, that would have been really arresting. And I was desperately trying to find the quote, but I'm sure I've heard, I think it's Max Cavalera from Sepultura talk about discovering Iron Maiden. And a lot of people of Max's generation, that next generation of metal musicians, they seem to just see that record in shops and just think, oh my God, I've got to buy this. I've never heard Iron Maiden, but I just see that looks heavy. Like, that looks kind of frightening dark. If you were into that kind of music, you'd buy it just based on the strength of the cover.
Yeah, I mean, you've basically got a rotted corpse of a character on the front with longish hair. Like, why wouldn't you pick that up and you'd be well within your rights to assume that's going to be some kind of heavy metal album.
Yeah, definitely. And it's weird. It sounds like a daft thing to say, but it just looks heavier. We might talk about, 1980s is a great year for metal, right? British Steel by Judas Priest, Heaven and Hell, Black Sabbath, first Aussie album, Wheels of Steel by Saxon, Back in Black AC/DC, right? It's a big year.
And also, if you look at the covers for those albums, right, they're, to me at least, they're not iconic in the same way. I mean, like Heaven and Hell's album cover is fantastic, but you don't see it and think that is going to be a heavy record.
No, the only other one I think that's... Well, Back in Black is its own thing, isn't it? Like the whole idea of a black album sleeve. But British Steel by Priest, the hand holding the razor blade, is the only...
Yeah, that's pretty metal.
Yeah, that is quite
figuratively
metal.
And literally.
Well, yeah, literally. But still, yeah, like Maiden's... And also, if you think of the album covers that set the trend for metal going forward, it's Iron Maiden, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
that is...
I mean, like, you were mentioning at the beginning of this episode that it was at this point atypical for a band to have a relationship with an artist who so strongly defines their visual stuff. But actually, off the back of Eddie, you get stuff like Vic Rattlehead in Megadeth and the relationship with Ed Repka. Like, a lot of bands start to follow that model, emulating Iron Maiden.
Yeah, and even just the idea of having a mascot.
Yeah.
Like, can you think of bands that have mascots prior to Iron Maiden?
No.
I mean, it's pretty much...
I mean, in principle, having a mascot for a band is a ridiculous thing.
Yeah.
But it kind of works.
I just think of football mascots. I love the idea of Iron Maiden's mascot being like a man in a bear costume with like a big inflatable hand.
Give me an eye. Give me an R.
Just be like a hype man in the background. That'd be great. I'll be into that.
Go, Steve. It's your birthday.
Yeah, good album cover.
Yeah, I think it's a good album cover. What I think is less good is the revised version of the artwork for is it a 1998 remastered CD?
It might, there might be two, I think it's 95 and 90. Yeah, but the 90s remaster.
The 90s remaster just has, for those who don't know, like a completely redrawn version of the artwork. I think it's still by Derek Riggs. I'm not entirely sure though, so don't quote me on that. But I guess part of the logic behind it was that Eddie on the original Iron Maiden artwork doesn't look completely like the Eddie that appears for the rest of their chronology. So maybe it's trying to bring it more in line and modernize it to 90s Iron Maiden branding standards. But it looks pants.
Yeah, it is. It's not great. It's... Yeah, but again, I guess the first Eddie and the first debut album, it's a less polished Riggs offering, compared to what he did in Power Slave. So it has a slightly more amateurish quality to it. But it just works, doesn't it?
It has a nice, like, 2000 AD British comic book vibe to it, whereas the revised artwork kind of feels like early days Photoshop to me.
Yeah, and I think it says a lot that Maiden have been that now. And all the current CD versions, everything's gone back to the original.
Yeah.
So they've just clearly gone, no, that was a silly idea.
Speaking of silly ideas, shall we talk about the album?
Yeah, go on. Well,
so, how are we approaching this? Track by
track one. Yeah, okay. Prowler. Banger.
You want to? Is that your official opinion? That's all you got.
Tomorrow. Banger.
Okay, so what are your thoughts on Prowler as an opener then?
Prowler's absolutely immense. There's something about that. What I love about the opening is it's the staccato riff. The fact you get that slight crackle from the amp, which sounds like Dave Murray's guitar, like he's just sort of turning the volume up of his guitar, and there's a slight feedback before the lead comes in. And it's just incredible. I absolutely love Prowler. The lead guitar line, Paul Di'Anno's lyrics as well, just that, seemingly about a stalker or a flasher.
But they're not Paul Di'Anno's lyrics.
Well, no, that's a good point. So Steve's lyrics, but Paul Di'Anno's delivery of the lyrics. Yeah, good point. It's just... Yeah, it's like a great album opener. And I will say one of the great Maiden album openers, actually, Prowler.
I think I mostly agree with that. I think it's a really great opener. I think it's really indicative of a surprisingly fully formed Iron Maiden sound. Like, you've got those sort of swirling guitar leads that drive a lot of it. You've got a middle eight section that picks up momentum and has like a bit of a signature change. I don't know music theory, so it's probably not a signature change. But, there's a lot of variety in the space of what feels like a more straight ahead Iron Maiden cut. It is really weird lyrically, though.
Yeah,
like,
the lyrics are odd.
Particularly in the context of 1980, I guess there's always going to be a vibe of we want to shock, we want to stand out, we want to have like a little bit of an edge to us. But listening back to it in 2022, there's something punchy about having a chorus that includes the lyric "Got me feeling myself" in your opening track on your opening album. Like, it's a song about stalking and masturbating. Like,
essentially.
That's pretty. That's
and the
a pretty
called
strong opening
Prowler.
gambit. Yeah,
it's.
I get like it's not meant to be. It's not an aspirational song.
No, that's true. Yeah,
but it's
a cautionary tale.
Don't walk through the city and have a wank.
And dare to look pretty.
Yeah. Yeah. I just think it's the beginning of a lot of weird lyrics, particularly in 80s Maiden, that doesn't quite gel with a lot of their more fantastical and historical based lyrics. Just have a lot of songs about demonizing sex workers.
Well, this is it. Like
and we'll come on to that shortly.
Yes, the early Iron Maiden do sort of get a kind of lyrical style, but the musical style's here, but the lyrical style's a little bit all over the place, right?
And look, this is like young dudes in their 20s, I guess. Like, I'm not judging them for writing not the greatest lyrics. Yeah. It's just it's a weird lyrical start.
It is a weird lyrical start, but as a song and musically, I think it's
musically
great.
It's that.
And I do think hearing it in 1980, it must have sounded just electric. It must have sounded so invigorating, just something, because it does sound, we'll talk about the production later on, but there's a kind of rawness to it, a directness, a punchiness that is just, like I still think it sounds invigorating. It baffles me why it's been out of the live set for so long. I know they've got a lot of songs to choose.
Maybe they read the lyrics.
Well, I think that might be it.
Although, having said that, there is a lot of live versions of it.
Yeah, but not the only time, as far as I can tell. I've only seen them do the song once on the Early Days tour.
Right.
And I don't think it's been played since the Early Days tour, which was 2005. So we're coming on to almost 2 decades where the song has not been played live at all, which is a shame.
That's also because, and this will be a rant for another day, but Maiden mostly want to play recent material, and their recent material is 10 minutes per track.
Yeah.
Sweeping generalization, but I'm right.
Yeah, there have been retrospective tours. Yeah, but anyway, but I would... If there was one song from this album I could bring back into the live set that I've not seen in a long time, it'd be Prowler.
So, interestingly, moving on to the next track, that's Remember Tomorrow. That's probably the song that if I could bring back into a live Maiden set, it would be Remember Tomorrow.
Saw them play that in 2005 as well.
Yeah, well...
Pretty great. Good time to be Glenn.
If it was 2005, was I there?
No, because it was Reading.
Ah, okay.
The Early Days tour.
No, it wasn't the Matter of Life and Death tour, which...
No.
Not a good first Maiden gig, if I'm honest. Good gig, but weird. Anyway, but yeah, Remember Tomorrow is definitely one of my favourite tracks off the album. I think it feels very different to anything Maiden will ever do again, if I'm honest. Like, there's some hallmarks of Maiden in there. There's like a atmospheric bass line and stuff, and like that heavy chorus riff is also very latter day, slower Iron Maiden impact riff.
But it's also very heavy, the chorus, isn't it?
Yeah,
that riff is really heavy. Like,
it's a properly menacing Sabbathy style riff, and the whole song feels a lot more 70s to me in general. Like, it's one of the few times I would liken Maiden to Sabbath, like, because of that sinister atmosphere, but even and because of that heavy chorus
Sabbath
riff.
Never did anything like Remember Tomorrow.
No,
like
that's
a sort of largely eerie, ambient, kind of clean acoustic style verse that builds into this really, really heavy chorus.
The thing is, like, we're calling it a chorus, but it is also partially what lets down the song in some ways, is that there's not a vocal part to it. Like, that chorus is just literally the riff.
Well, yeah, but it's all about the falsettos, isn't it?
No, but those only happen on live versions.
Oh, do they really?
On the recorded version, on the recorded version, Paul Di'Anno does nothing over that heavy riff. Whereas live versions, such as on the Early Days DVD, like, he has this cool falsetto scream over the top that really like elevates it. In this recorded version, it's he's just chilling, you know.
But songs like Remember Tomorrow, and we'll talk about Strange World, they do really showcase the range of Paul Di'Anno's vocals, because he's not dismissed. He's sort of warmly, he's well liked amongst Maiden fans, but when he's written about, he's often seen as, he's the gruff, the kind of pub barker, growler kind of. He's not given much credit as actually like a good vocalist. Whereas I think this album shows off a real range. Like, but he can really do the clean parts, and
I think the interesting thing about Remember Tomorrow is, you're right, it does show a range, but it also very clearly shows his limits at the same time. Like, as he starts to reach for those high screams, his voice gets quite thin in comparison to the rest of the performance.
Quite possibly.
But then, like, he does sound great on it. Like,
but he's not just like this punky snarler, which is like a lot of people like to characterize him as.
The narrative around Paul Di'Anno is factually wrong a lot of the time, but that's because everyone got spoiled by Bruce later on.
But yeah, true. Maybe a final thought about Remember Tomorrow. I thought it was interesting that when Metallica covered Iron Maiden, so they submitted that song, was it the Kerrang Maiden compilation?
The Kerrang Maiden Heaven.
Metallica chose to cover Remember Tomorrow, and I think if you think
choice,
amazing choice, and they actually do it really well. Like, people slag off, modern day Metallica, but I think it's a very faithful but very good cover.
Great cover.
But I think you can plot a line, can't you, from Remember Tomorrow to Fade to Black to Sanitarian to One. You know what I mean? That format, that style. And you can tell Metallica.
It's a style that I just don't think Iron Maiden delve into all that often.
No, and maybe they should.
Like,
they do it well.
For instance, like, I don't know, it always makes me think of like the first third of Hallowed Be Thy Name.
Yeah, or Children of the Damned.
Yeah, or Children of the Damned, and then those songs go like full Maiden, basically at a certain point.
Thinking of Metallica covers as well, there is a live cover of Metallica doing Prowler.
That sounds fun.
Yeah, and I think it's from the Justice for All tour as well. Like, it's like bootleg footage.
Good era.
Like, there's no professional quality. I've not heard any professional audio or video quality of it. But yeah, it's obvious that, like, when Metallica talk about Maiden, they're largely talking about this album and Killers, aren't they? Like, this is what
definitely. In
into.
their chronology, like, Killers, Iron Maiden and Killers are like before Metallica happens.
Yeah,
right.
True.
And
then,
then, whilst I'm sure they keep up to speed with Maiden, at that point they're busy writing their own stuff.
But so far, like, an amazingly strong but varied start to the album.
It's 2 for 2.
Yeah, 2 for 2. Prowler into Remember Tomorrow, and into track 3, Running Free.
I bloody love Running Free.
It's great, isn't it?
But it also
really
feels
good.
more like Deep Purple or Rainbow to me. Like, it's very the poppier side of Ritchie Blackmore than it is.
Yeah.
It's when I think of Iron Maiden, I don't think of Running Free. Let me put it like that.
No.
But I do. Whenever I hear Running Free, I just smile. It's such a joyfully stupid song.
You talk about Deep Purple. Paul Di'Anno always says that sort of floor-tom, bass snare, he says that comes, unfortunately, from a Gary Glitter song. Yeah, that's a shame, isn't it? That's a shame.
Don't ruin this song for me, Blev.
Well, Paul Di'Anno ruined it for me, so I'm going to ruin it for everyone else.
Great.
So, but that aside, yeah, you're right, it is at the popular end of the Maiden spectrum, and yet there are these sort of very quintessential Maiden flourishes, aren't there? Like the diddle diddle diddle, the really dexterous lead guitar stuff, and like lots of whittling, like
lots of
whittling, a very sort of like classic Steve Harris. I love all the, and the fact that song doesn't get played every gig, far from it, but it does pop up from time to time in concerts.
Yeah, it's definitely a song they embrace live, which I really appreciate, because it's also a really nice palate cleanser between more epic and over the top.
It is, isn't it? And there's something so satisfying about that. I'm running free, I'm running free.
It's just a good sing-along
so
pub
fun
jaunt.
So fun. Not really sure I've got much else to say about it. It's just great.
Yeah.
And it's also, we'll talk about it in the context of it being a single, but just like a great NWO BHM single, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like a perfect and Wobben single. I'm trying to think of others that match it. I mean, there aren't many, like it's, great, works very well as a single.
It's a good one.
Yeah. But now this is where things get very special, I think. Like, you'd listen to the first 3 songs and go, this is a fantastic start to an album. But where I think it's hard to put yourself in the mind of, say I was 16 in 1980, and I just brought this album home. I think it's track 4, Phantom of the Opera. I think this is where I would go, holy hell, this is the game changer.
Yeah.
This is like, we can talk about Running 3 and be like, oh, there's bits of Deep Purple, Remember Tomorrow, yeah, bits of like sort of 70s prog in there. Prowler, quite Judas Priesty, really, with like a Thin Lizzy guitar line. Phantom of the Opera, I think, is where I struggle to. This is new.
Yeah.
This is really
so in
new.
my notes, I've put Phantom of the Opera is the most Maiden song on the album. Like, it is the blueprint for the Maiden sound, basically.
Yeah. And it's early days to be calling it, but when people ask me, and they often do, Blethen, what's your favourite Iron Maiden song?
No one has ever
and
asked
I say, well, that's
that.
an interesting question. Thank you for asking. I say...
Just some guy off the street asking you this.
Yeah. They see me wearing one of my many Iron Maiden t-shirts, and they say, oh, hi, Blethen. I'd just like to know, what's your favourite Iron Maiden song? And I say, that's a hard question, but probably Phantom of the Opera.
Wow.
Yeah,
that is a big claim.
Yeah, no, I might not necessarily go for... I might go for the Live After Death version. But, which is no shade on Paul, I just think it sounds bigger, the guitars sound fatter and everything. But Phantom of the Opera, I think, is an astonishing achievement. Apparently, you can always tell this when you listen to it. Steve Harris apparently wrote it as almost individual sections that he glued together into a song. Which
makes sense. And, like, whilst I love the song, I don't think it's as perfect as you might do.
Go on.
Well, for one, I do think aspects of it are slightly disjointed. Like, they haven't quite got the glue together to do the changes that will happen across a lot of Maiden's discography. And to be honest, the main example of that for me is just the opening riff. It's just that same lick 3 times, just with no variation in it. It just feels... I always find it really weird. And then it gets into the song proper, and it's like, now this is great.
Yeah, I didn't disagree with any of that, but that opening riff...
It's a bit rough.
Yeah, but who had written a riff that sounds like that?
Yeah.
It's sort of like...
But it's that 3 times.
Well, yeah, it's like an orchestra falling down the stairs. It's like a really just odd but compelling riff. It's just like what... And even now... And, neither of us would profess to be particularly great guitar players, but, I'm okay.
We dabble.
Yeah, we dabble. Trying to play that riff, just because it seems to defy any coherent time signature, is so hard. And when you think you've got 2 guitar players, presumably playing various different harmonised versions of it, are just bonkers. And then the song it goes into... I mean, that is like proto-thrash metal, isn't it, that verse? I mean, very few bands are playing at that level of speed, that level of ferocity, but then the melody and like the really huge chorus, the mid-section, the instrumental passages, I just think it's a phenomenal achievement.
Don't get me wrong, I think it's a great song, and I think it sets up a lot of Iron Maiden's career, basically. I just don't think it's flawless, but that's good. I think something being flawless... is not necessarily the most enjoyable thing anyway.
Fair. Before we move on...
it's still on Phantom.
Go on, Phantom.
I've got 2 things.
Yeah.
One is, and I guess this applies to a lot of the album, but Phantom in particular has a lot of like quite high register backing vocals, and there's a couple of other songs across the album that have them, and they just never reappear again for the most part. Maybe they're on Killers.
They don't
Killers,
particularly.
But I assume that's Steve Harris and Dennis Stratton.
Yeah.
I think, looking at the liner notes. And it's just a weird thing that just never comes back.
Yeah, you're right. Apparently, this is the influence of Dennis Stratton, who, going back to the last episode, we said he was an odd fit for Iron Maiden in the sense that he didn't really like heavy metal.
Yeah.
He liked Queen and the Eagles. So there's a story about how, whilst the rest of the band were out the studio, Dennis Stratton and the engineer or the producer basically added loads of strings to Phantom of the Opera and all these multi-layered vocal tracks. And apparently when Rod heard it, Rod was like, what are you doing? Get that off the track. Like, this is not heavy metal, but I think a lot of those vocal harmonies, the keep your distance.
Yeah, I really like them.
I think it's great.
Yeah.
And Steve, I think that is Steve's voice in the background as well, because he does do that higher register, like you hear it on some live recordings. But yeah, I think a lot of that came from Dennis Stratton, and it works really well. Yeah, no, I agree. I really like that.
And then my only other thing on this song was I noticed, so in preparation for this episode, I listened to both the original LP of the album that I've had for like 20 years now, and the CD remaster. On the LP version of Phantom of the Opera, it ends with like a little weird distorted vocal thing that doesn't happen on the CD version.
Yes.
Where like it just repeats one of the lyrics, but more evil sounding.
Yeah, it's
and
like back at your lair.
Yeah, like that's how they end side A, and it's like, whoa, that's like oddly creepy and terrifying.
Yeah,
whereas
you're right.
on the CD version they just like brush past that. It's like, it's a real shame to lose that. And I just thought it was an interesting, I guess, like example of how album structures changed between LP and CD, in that like LPs had a side A and side B, so like an act 1 and act 2, and CDs will just like crank on for 80 minutes and not stop. I don't know. I liked it.
Yeah, no, I like it.
I like that little like breakup.
There's that definitive end to side A, isn't there? So as a side A, 4 tracks.
It's a very, very good side A.
And again, last episode we spoke about, or we touched upon why Maiden became bigger than a lot of their modern peers, and we said Rod Smallwood and all these other influences. But really, I would...
The material's up
there.
Yeah,
I would challenge anyone to find me a side A of a debut and modern album that's better than the side A of Iron Maiden.
Challenge accepted.
Just going to go away now and
I'm going to listen to a lot
loads of Sledgehammer. Come on, there's got to be one.
Like, unless they have the lyric "You're an angel witch," it's definitely not going to be.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, the only others that come close, I think, are Angel Witch. I've got a lot of time for Demon as well. Demon are really good. I mean, Diamond Head, but it's not. It's just they're great, but they're not as good.
Yeah,
but then
not their debut.
But then this is top tier, right?
Yeah.
So then we're on to side B, opening with an instrumental, Transylvania.
I have mixed feelings about Transylvania.
Oh,
I think it is a good instrumental, and I think it is a good piece, but it also just feels, and this is in the context of 2022, or when I first heard it in the context of like 2004, it just feels really self-indulgent. Whereas I imagine in 1980, that's a pretty mind-blowing thing to have as your opener to side B, is like this really elaborate instrumental. And I think for all my criticism of it, there's lots of examples of what would go on to be Maiden's like core riffing style and sound in that song. I don't know. I never particularly want to listen to Transylvania, if I'm honest.
See,
and maybe that's partially because Iced Earth also ruined it.
Yeah,
at
I
some
mean,
point by putting on a horror show,
yeah.
and they've ruined everything by being Iced Earth.
Yes, no, I mean, yeah, that point.
I'm a recovering Iced Earth fan for anyone else out there. It's
get in touch
it's a daily
if you're also
struggle,
struggling,
if I'm honest,
with this terrible affliction.
Damn you, John Schaefer.
But Transylvania, I would say the reason I like it is the riffs are just great, and it's an instrumental, but it's basically just a collection of great riffs, isn't it?
Yeah, it is also doubly ruined for me by Paul Di'Anno, though. And I think I've mentioned this to you before.
Have, yeah.
But years ago, I had to review a Paul Di'Anno live DVD, which there was a vibe to it, but it wasn't fantastic. But Paul Di'Anno, the singer of Iron Maiden, chooses to have his band play Transylvania, which in itself is kind of weird. But he also uses it as a stage bantering opportunity to be very transphobic, and it's a bit off.
It's like, Paul, it's a bloody instrumental. You don't have to say anything.
Yeah,
that's the point. You can just be like, and
keep it down.
You know this one because you've obviously heard the first Iron Maiden album. Here we go.
Yeah,
but I think Transylvania works. Because I think it's just great riffs. Again, very different. It's weird though, because we talk about moments in this album where Maiden clearly separate themselves from the world of 70s hard rock.
Yeah.
This is one for me, massively.
Yeah, definitely.
That was sounding very different to anything that had gone before. And also, unlike most instrumentals, it's not very self-indulgent. It's not like a noodly guitar sort of whittle fest, is it? It's actually like a proper song.
And maybe self-indulgent is the wrong word or words to use for it. I guess for me something's always missing, right? Like,
yeah, it's fair enough.
There's so much of like an instrumental blueprint for future Maiden songs there that, well, if you had just added some vocals to it, it would be a song.
Well, that is an interesting decision, and you wonder if part of that is just Steve Harris going, well, we are again the anti-punk thing. Like what is really anti-punk? An instrumental, right? This is, we are proper musicians. I wonder to what extent, because I can imagine a world where that song has vocals. It's not like it's so
it could
weird
definitely
that
have a vocal line.
It could, couldn't it? Yeah, but clearly that was a conscious choice to be like, no, we are the kind of band who do instrumentals. Although weirdly, Maiden wouldn't do many more. Like it was sort of there aren't many more instrumentals. But again, I'm talking about Metallica a lot. Thinking of heavy metal bands doing instrumentals not as interludes or intros, but as like actual songs. You feel like Metallica when they were doing Call of Cthulhu and
or
Orion were thinking, oh yeah, this is the kind of Iron Maiden. This is what Iron Maiden kind of start for metal bands,
definitely,
isn't it? Strange World, interesting one.
Yeah, again, sort of. So in a similar way to Remember Tomorrow, it feels like a side of Maiden that doesn't necessarily appear again so much.
Yeah,
like
even more so than Remember Tomorrow, I think, Strange World.
It's sort of like the closest thing Maiden have to a Planet Caravan.
Yeah.
But also it's more boring.
Yeah, it is.
To be honest, I don't have a lot of love for Strange World. It's fine. It's an interesting pace breaker.
It's a nice palate cleanser, isn't it? And this goes right the way back to 76. This is the one very much that is like, oh, well, Steve Harris likes 70s prog.
Yeah.
Like, particularly like Canterbury prog scene bands. It's a good vocal performance from Paul Di'Anno, I think. Like, again, showing his softer side. I think he does that very well.
Definitely. It's just a shame it's a boring song.
I mean, I wouldn't,
I wouldn't lose it from the album.
Of the word boring.
I think it helps vary up the pace of everything. It's just also what skip buttons were made for.
Well, yeah.
Although I say that, and actually I never skip tracks on albums because that's not how they should be listened to.
Well, indeed, yeah. And when I get to
I'm a pretentious hack.
It is the one, I'll be honest, that I always vaguely remember. I only sort of vaguely remember it's there when I go back to someone. I'm like, oh yeah, the Strange World. It's an odd little song just because it's really the only time this album I think this song could have been by many other bands.
Yeah, definitely.
Like this could be by lots of other just prog bands who are knocking about in the 70s. It doesn't sound really, other than the distinctive qualities of Paul Di'Anno's voice, there's not really a lot about it that you'd think, oh, this is distinctively an Iron Maiden song. Yeah, almost quite the contrary. Like it's very unusual. So that's Strange World. Now, if you've got the remastered edition of the CD, you will have Sanctuary, or indeed, if you live in the United States of America and you bought this album in 1980, you also would have Sanctuary as track 7.
That's interesting because the version of the CD I'm holding right here has Sanctuary as the second track. So
that's
I assumed
weird.
we were going to talk about it after the album.
That is weird. Right, okay, well, on the original remaster, I believe, it appeared as track 7. But certainly in the American edition, it appeared as track 7. So when this album was released in America, you got Sanctuary as track 7. But we're going to park that for the time being, because for most of you in the UK, that was not the case. So for most of you, track 7 was Charlotte the Harlot, written by
Dave Murray, right?
Yeah, his sole contribution to this album. And Dave Murray songs are... They're quite... there's something
deeply
of a rarity.
problematic.
No, but they're usually not. This is the odd thing. Like, they are something of a rarity in the Iron Maiden back catalogue. I'm trying to... Yeah, that's right. I was thinking, if you think of the band Queen...
Yeah.
It's a bit like John Deacon, the bass player of Queen. He didn't often write songs, but when he does, he happens to write, like, massive, great songs. Yeah. So maybe that analogy isn't great, because that's not necessarily Dave Murray and Iron Maiden. But he does write good stuff. And his only contribution to this record, and indeed the only song that Steve Harris doesn't have any hand in whatsoever, because I believe this is a sole Murray
in the
credit.
entire discography, or just in the album?
No, just in this album, yeah.
Okay. I was about to say.
Yeah, the only song in this record that Steve doesn't have any writing credits on at all is Charlotte the Harlot. Thoughts about Charlotte the Harlot? I mean, Charlotte and Harlot do rhyme, so that's a good start.
So it's weird, like, in many ways, I love this song, and I think it's an absolute banger. but there was something about re-listening to it as like I guess sadly I'm a fully grown up nowadays and very boring. But it's similar to Prowler. There's something weird about, like, particularly with Charlotte the Harlot starting a saga of songs that are basically demonizing this very specific sex worker. And
yeah,
I mean, the lyrics to this song get quite incel-y at points, it's just kind of like very victim blaming, and it's a weird song. Look, none of the lyrics on this entire album are particularly deep, and as I said before, you know, they're trying to be edgy. They're early 20s.
I think there's a lot. Like, I don't want to excuse anything like that, but
it is weird as hell.
It is weird. It is certainly icky at the very least.
Yeah. But then Charlotte and Harlot does rhyme.
It does rhyme. So, you know, he's done his homework, hasn't he?
Someone owns a rhyming dictionary.
Yeah, well done, Dave Murray. Musically, though, yeah, I like Charlotte the Harlot. To me, it's the most Nwabum song on this album. Like, when I think of like what new wave British heavy metal sounds like, it is a lot of small bands releasing songs that sound something like Charlotte the Harlot.
Yeah.
So it's, in a way, it's kind of obvious that it's not a Harris song, because like a lot of the hallmarks of Maiden aren't there. Like, there's not much of that twin lead guitar stuff. And we talked about, you know, punk and Steve Harris hating punk and trying to tell everyone that Charlotte the Harlot's quite punky, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and particularly when you get into the chorus with like
like that is quite it's like, sorry Steve, but that is quite punky, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
But yeah, Charlotte the Harlot, good. Good.
7 out of 10. Bit weird.
Yeah, weird, kind of very of its time, not even just lyrically, but musically as well. It's a very rooted 1980, which brings us on to the final track, Iron Maiden by Iron Maiden, off the album Iron Maiden. Going for the big three there.
Yeah.
The triple header.
I love this song, but I also think it's really stupid.
Oh, no. It's hard to write a self-titled song. It's hard.
Maybe don't do it.
Well, no, but it's good. It's what more bands should do.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is.
Metallica by Metallica off the album Metallica.
Eric Clapton by Eric Clapton off the album Eric Clapton. It's what I want from bands.
That'd just be a biographical song about being a racist.
But yeah. I am insane.
Please don't sue me.
Quick little tangent, perhaps. Best eponymous songs by metal bands. Iron Maiden by Iron Maiden. I'm going to throw in Manowar by Manowar.
I mean, as a recovering Iced Earth fan, I do have to say Iced Earth by Iced Earth is a proper
good.
banger, particularly when
good.
they re-recorded it with Matt Barlow. It's just, everything by that band is tainted.
Yeah, and also when you think about it, Iced Earth by Iced Earth, they really have literally gone for the Iron Maiden by Iron Maiden blueprint, haven't they?
Oh yeah, entirely. But I mean, the entire early days of Iced Earth is like, what if Iron Maiden, but Metallica played it?
Yeah.
And then done. Except without as good a vocalist of either, for the first album at least.
Black Sabbath by Black Sabbath, obviously.
Yeah.
The original. Metal Church by Metal Church.
Yeah.
Another great self-titled song.
Okay, but enough about other bands. What about this self-titled song?
And again, like Phantom of the Opera, very unusual riff.
Yeah, that's true.
Like really strange, but works perfectly. For me, like, I love the song, but I find it so hard to detach it from the live setting. It's such an integral part of an Iron Maiden live show that almost when it pops up in the album, I'm like, oh yeah, this is like a studio song. Here. Like, it almost feels like it's just a part of the Maiden live
Yeah, I get what you mean.
But it's a great song, and yeah, lyrically it's daft as anything.
Yeah.
But it almost feels like it is written to serve as like that.
It is basically
climactic
like
moment of a live show, isn't it?
Ending chant to a show.
Yeah, and just, the perfect opportunity to go, Iron Maiden, it's gonna get you. It's just brilliant, and it's very life affirming as an Iron Maiden fan, because it's become imbued with so many memories of live gigs. Yeah, I love this song. It's really, a good song. It is a good song. And again, it's a very old song. It sounds very different in the 77 version as well. It goes on quite a journey from this, quite almost laid back kind of feel this weird little spindly riff to something that's really ferocious. And, you know, when Nicky McBrain does it, it's all like that double bass, sort of like that. It's not quite a double bass, actually. It's, but you know what I mean? It's almost like a kind of punk D beat type thing. Sorry, Steve, I said punk, but...
Sorry, Steve.
But yeah, like, it's hard to think of a better way to finish this album, really.
That's fair. Okay, so that's every track on the album, at least in its original guise.
Yes. Well, should we get to Sanctuary do the singles? Because first off,
fine.
Let's just talk a little bit about the production.
Okay.
Because the production has become... We spoke last episode about Will Malone, this useless producer, according to the band, who does nothing, and they're left to almost kind of essentially self-produce their debut album. Very quickly after the album comes out, the band are very dismissive about the production of it.
Right.
Would you like to hear what Paul Di'Anno said about it 6 months after it came out? Speaking to Malcolm Dome.
Yes, of course, especially speaking to Malcolm Dome.
Well, in Malcolm Dome's remembering of the conversation, Di'Anno described the production as rather embarrassing. He said, "The songs are strong enough on stage. On record, though, they sound a little weak." Okay, Paul Di'Anno goes on. "So it was our first album, and it was an achievement in a way to have even got it out. But production-wise, when I listen and compare it to some of the LPs I have at home, I think, well, for fuck's sake, what's going on? It's pretty gritty."
Really?
That's what Paul Di'Anno said about it. And then he's talking about it, 6 months after its release.
That's pretty damning.
Bruce Dickinson, in a later interview, this is from the 21st century, I forget exactly when, said, "The first album sounds like, quote, shit." And he said, Steve...
that sounds like Bruce.
Yeah, Steve always regretted the production of the first album, Bruce Dickinson says. So there is almost no one in Iron Maiden who has anything nice to say about the production. Funny enough, Paul Di'Anno now says he doesn't understand what everyone's going on about and he thinks it sounds great.
Yeah,
that's
think
not
it's
what he said at the time.
Particularly like the LP version, the original version of it sounds like pretty warm and thick and like it. Yeah, I didn't really have any issues with the production. It sounds like a little rough around the edges, but then...
And I think that's what their issue is. And I wonder if it's, again, Steve Harris always saw Iron Maiden as being a big band. You know, that's why he held out for a major record label. He didn't sign to an independent.
At that point.
Well, no, but I think he did. I think he clearly saw Iron Maiden being massive, and he saw Iron Maiden. He thought his vision for Iron Maiden is that they shouldn't be ranked alongside Angel Witch or Praying Mantis. They should be ranked alongside Purple or Priest or, you know, major label, big bands.
But that takes time.
Well, it does, yeah, but, you know, I think that's just his vision for it. But I agree with you. I think it sounds really good. And I think it's the perfect mix. A lot of those Nwabum releases and albums, particularly the independent record labels, they either sound incredibly rough around the edges, you know, to the point where, like, this sounds really amateurish, or on the other side, they're like over-polished. Because that's what major labels tend to do, right? They tend to overproduce things to make it get radio play, which is still a big thing in 1980. Maiden, by luck as more than anything, I think navigate a perfect sweet spot between something that has a kind of rawness to it, a roughness to it, but not to the point where they sand it down so much that it's all sheen.
Yeah,
like
I think that's an important balance for them to be striking. Like, there's a lot of melodicism across the album, and you want that to come through, but at the same time, it's the beginning of metal as we know it, and it sounds like it.
And also, we tend to forget, outside a handful of people, this is the beginning of metal, people don't really know what to do with it in studio.
Yeah.
There aren't many people who've had experience with music like this, and so they either do tend to over-polish it, or just hit record and hope for the best.
Yeah.
Maiden, by luck, I think actually end up with something that sounds really good.
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't see it like that, but...
Apparently not.
No, apparently not. So the singles then, so before Iron Maiden comes out, we said actually the debut album is the world's introduction to the artwork of Derek Riggs.
But that's not true, is it?
It's not true, because technically it's the Running Free single. Play along at home if you'd like to look at the Running Free single artwork now, which was released on the 15th of February, 1980.
Right.
And this is, the B-side is Burning Ambition.
Yeah.
Which again came up last episode because it was in the Maiden live set, you know, throughout the late 70s.
And there's a reason it's a B-side?
There is a reason it's a B-side. Yeah, again, talking of Maiden making that leap from a 70s hard rock band to an 80s heavy metal band, there's a part of me that imagines an alternative reality where Maiden, and this could have happened, there were independent labels interested in Maiden in the late 70s. Had Maiden released their debut album in 1977, I think you'd have a lot more stuff that sounded like Burning Ambition. It was for the
that makes
better that
sense.
they waited, actually.
Yeah.
Because, yes, fine, but it's a 70s hard... It's like a Thin Lizzy style,
Yeah.
nice enough hard rock song.
That metal sound was still gestating.
Yeah. I mean, Running Through, we already said. Banger.
Banger.
Great. Perfect choice of a lead single of the songs available.
It's super catchy.
Also noteworthy, because this is Maiden's first Top of the Pops appearance. Playing Running Free.
Am I right in thinking that typically in that era, or all eras really, Top of the Pops would have you play backing tracks, but Maiden insisted on playing live?
Yeah.
That sounds like Iron Maiden.
And exactly, yeah. It's that kind of...
I think the only other band who had done that at that point was Twisted Sister.
And maybe The Who as well had done it, but back a while ago. But it was very uncommon. Producers generally discouraged or actively just forbade it. But Maiden, again, Steve Harris, determined / belligerent man, says we're going to do it live. And even then, they're not happy because they said it was far too quiet. If you see the footage of it, I think they look and sound great.
I have to check it out.
Yeah, it's on YouTube. I'm pretty sure it pops up in the early days DVD as well. But they look like if I'd seen that in 1980, I'd be like, wow, this is so cool.
Yeah.
Like Paul Di'Anno back then as well just looked, leather jacket. He's basically copied the Rob Halford thing, right? But
pretty much.
He's still in Rob Halford's look, but he wears it very well. And it's a great performance from them. And again, it's weird for Maiden because they insist on performing it live, yet they're so tight even then. You almost a hard push to tell. It's not, were it not for this differences in Paul's vocals, the music is so tight. It's like this could almost be a backing track. It's not, but they're just that good.
Okay, so you've got Running Free.
Free. Then we've got Sanctuary, which again, so this is where the early years of Maiden get a little bit weird, right? Because if you're a die-hard fan and you've sort of been paying attention, you've already got the version of Sanctuary that appears in the Metal for Mothers compilation.
Yeah.
They record a new version, and this is a standalone single. Again, which isn't something Maiden... It's only really the first couple of years of Maiden, the standalone single, as in a non-album track.
Yeah.
Being released as a single is a thing. And you get the B-side of Drifter, which again appears on Killers as a studio song. And I've Got the Fire. And actually, the version of Drifter I've got has Prowler on it as well.
Yeah.
So it's like a side A and a side B, Sanctuary, Prowler, and then the live version of Drifter, and again, I've Got the Fire, the Montrose cover with that famous Californian, not Canadian, Sammy Hagar. But Sanctuary, good song.
Yeah, I think it's a good song. Again, it hews much closer to a 70s rock sound, and
definitely. Yeah.
I think it makes sense not having it on the album. So it's kind of interesting that when the album gets a CD release, or American release at least, it gets slotted in apparently variable places depending on who's releasing the album.
Very fun live though. I'm glad from time to time it still gets an airing live.
Yeah.
Because I love hearing Sanctuary live. It's just very good fun.
It's a good song.
But yeah, you're right.
But it's expendable.
Yes, yeah, it is. Again, part of the reason I think Maiden are such a great and Robin band is they're quite atypical. But Sanctuary is a very typical and Robin song.
Yeah, exactly.
In the sense, it's got one foot in the 70s hard rock camp.
It could have been released by a ton of other people, right?
Yeah, it could have done, if we're being honest. Yeah,
distinctly Iron Maiden.
Not at all. And interestingly, there's some talk about who wrote Sanctuary.
Ooh,
because I believe on the record, it's one of the few songs that is discredited as the writers to Iron Maiden.
You are correct. It is listed as Iron Maiden.
Now, that is unusual.
Never happens.
I don't think that has ever happened ever again. Now, the controversy... Well, not necessarily the controversy, but the suggestion is, apparently Dave Murray once said that song was written by one of the sort of... one of the many second guitar players that Maiden had in the late 70s, someone who came and went, and that was actually his song. Maiden adopted it. I mean, as far as I can tell, he's never publicly called Maiden out for it. He doesn't seem bothered by it, but that might explain why it sounds stylistically quite different,
but it would explain the vagueness around writers'
and the
credits.
vagueness around the writing credits, exactly. So it's just credited to Iron Maiden, whoever that might be. Bearing in mind there are 13 people in Iron Maiden before the debut album even came out, so I don't know how they dish out the royalties for that, but yeah. Very good live version in Rock in Rio as well, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, the Rock in Rio version of Sanctuary is very fun. And then completing the sort of run of singles from this album, worth pointing out, all these singles for a metal band do really well. So they all pretty much get within the top 40 or hover around the 40-30 mark. Like, a good effort for, like, a band of Maiden. I mean, we haven't even said yet that the album itself charted at... Oh, no, hang on, I'm getting ahead of myself here.
You are getting ahead of yourself.
Getting ahead of myself. Control yourself, Blethen. Third single. The weirdest of the... I mean...
Women in Uniform.
The weirdest single in the history of Iron Maiden, I'm going to say.
It's a cover, and not only is it a cover, it's quite odd subject matter for Maiden. Like, I know we're talking about, like, the debut album having some weird-ass songs about prowling and harlots, but I don't think there's any Iron Maiden songs that are specifically, like, I really fancy this woman.
Yeah, women.
They're great. They're great. Like, they're never that kind of band.
No.
They'll always take a weirder, creepier angle with it. So Women in Uniform is an odd choice for a cover, and it also reeks of, did they want to do this, or did a label make them do it?
Well, exactly, and Maiden themselves have been quite open about the fact they didn't want to do it. And I think, Steve has said that the label made us do it. We did it. We didn't like it, and from that moment on, we were like, we're not going to be told by record labels. What was
the logic of the label making them do it? Because it's so atypical.
And it wasn't even a big hit. Like, it's by an obscure Australian rock band called Skyhooks.
Right.
I think the song might have charted in Australia, but did nothing. Well, I mean, no disrespect to the members of Skyhooks, but
some disrespect
to members of Skyhooks. I mean, not a band that went on to any massive success.
No.
So, I don't know, it wasn't unprecedented. Like, Judas Priest recently had done a cover of Better By You, Better Than Me, off Stay in Class, which again was released as a single. I think that was an Australian band as well, Spooky Tooth.
It's the logic of, like, UK record labels at that point, like, well, you know, no one's ever going to hear these songs from Australia. So if we get these Brits to do them, quid's in, and they'll think they're original.
Yeah, basically. Fun artwork, though. You've got, like, Margaret Thatcher, or a woman who looks a lot like Margaret Thatcher with, like, a beret and army gear.
Margaret Thatcher. Like, legally distinct
legally
enough.
Fine, but holding, like, a submachine gun waiting for Eddie as he's walking home with two girls. I mean, that's quite cool. I mean, it's silly as anything, but I quite like that. It's quite fun.
Yeah, they're fun covers.
Do you want to know what Paul Di'Anno had to say about the song?
The
answer's probably no, but we're going to anyway. Speaking at the time, Di'Anno said, "I've changed the words around a bit. The original's pretty sexist." You think, oh, okay, I think I know where this is going. But our version is really sexist. Oh dear. Oh dear. We thought, right, if the song's going to be like that, we might as well go all the way and make it even worse.
Paul, that is a swing and a miss.
We don't care if we get a slagging for it. All that burn your bras bit is a pain in the arse.
Oh, man. Jeez.
Paul Di'Anno's thoughts on second-wave feminism there.
Not particularly erudite, and
no.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed pretty true to character. So
I also can't figure out. I haven't dug into this that deeply, but I'm not sure what lyrical changes they did make. I mean, it sounds like, to my casual listening, it just seems, like you said, like a slightly silly, "Oh, women are pretty" song, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean, like women in uniform.
Yeah, it's
quite childish titillation, isn't it?
Yeah, childish titillation is a very good way to describe it. It's very much the ilk of song of just like, here is a mild fetish I have, and I'm going to commit this to vinyl.
Yeah,
which is, you know, you do you weird.
I mean,
people.
It's kind of. It's all right, isn't it, as a song? I mean,
it's fine.
I'm glad.
I'm now really curious what the lyrical change is, because part of me expects, like, oh, I've swapped some of the words around, so now it's uniform in women.
Are we glad it's not on the album?
Yes.
Yes, yeah, massively. I'm so glad it's not on the album.
That would really derail the momentum of the album, I think.
It could have totally been, couldn't it? I'm so glad it's not. Also, the first Iron Maiden music video we get is for Women in Uniform.
That's the first video?
Yeah. That's the first music video we get, yeah.
I mean, I remember the video. It's terrible.
It's quite charmingly silly. Like there's sort of
it's also
studio
terrible.
live footage with a really early mock-up of Eddie, which is just someone in a mask, and two women wearing sort of like sexy nurse uniforms, but also looking quite goth as well. Like they should be Cure fans rather than metal fans, which I quite appreciate. It's very silly and good fun.
Yeah, it's not great. I'm surprised they didn't make a video for something like Sanctuary instead.
No, weirdly not. We don't get a video for Running Free. We don't get a video for Sanctuary, the other singles. We just get a video for Women in Uniform.
Bizarre.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's part of the record company's deal. They'll record the song, we'll do a video, we'll push it really hard. But hey, it's there. Take it or leave it, I guess.
I will leave it.
So, the legacy of the record. At the time, it gets really good reviews. The usual suspects, Malcolm Dome, Jeff Barton.
Yeah.
Love it. I think Jeff Barton said something interesting. I'm paraphrasing slightly here, but when it came out, Jeff Barton, I think, was writing for Sounds, because Krang still isn't quite yet a thing.
Right.
Says this is like the start of the 80s and talks about this album essentially kind of blowing away 70s hard rock. This is like a new line in the sand. Yeah,
well, I guess like we said before, like it's sort of a watershed moment for the genre.
Yeah.
Like this is definably heavy metal. It's not, here are all these things that could be heavy metal. This is definitely heavy metal.
That's it, isn't it?
Like that's how it feels to me. I would say a bunch of Priest albums beforehand are probably metal as well, but this is definitely that moment where like it feels like this is a subculture.
Yeah. And there's, I mean, the 70s hard rock influence is obviously there, but there's a few things they sort of ditch. So one is like that kind of sense of swing and boogie that bands like Lizzie or Budgie, they had a slightly jazzy feel rhythmically. That's gone. It's all like that staccato,
it's not
solid.
Completely gone though.
It's
like, look at a song like Running Free, right? Like
maybe that's the one exception. Fair point. Yeah, but a lot of it is much more staccato, kind of 4/4. Also, the bluesy influence in the riffs in particular has been almost shorn off, hasn't it? It's not like Zeppelin or Purple, who were still very indebted to the blues. The way Harris wrote riffs was much more just like kind of really fast prog, wasn't it? Like, so, I don't think Steve...
It's just more abrasive.
Yeah, more abrasive, faster. The most influential new wave of British heavy metal album? Discuss. When you think of the likes of Metallica.
So, yeah. Like...
What
else would tip it?
Welcome to Hell by Venom.
No.
And Black Metal by Venom.
No. Absolutely not. Venom very influential and shape a certain side of metal.
What, like all extreme metal?
Yeah. But
and thrash metal.
Right, but this
so
album,
essentially what metal became.
No, because this album shapes thrash metal.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue
this is the blueprint for heavy metal, for thrash, for power, for
certainly for power.
It's the beginning of a lot of stuff. You look at, I don't know, something like Halloween's first album. You take the early Iron Maiden blueprint, you make it really fast, and you get speed metal, and it's like.
Well, when we get a Twitter page, maybe we can do a poll. Welcome to Hell or the Iron Maiden self-titled debut, because don't get me wrong, obviously I'm a massive Iron Maiden fan. In terms of its influence, I would almost contend that the first two Venom records are probably the most influential metal records of this era. In terms of what metal became.
I also think like just the sheer size of Iron Maiden versus Venom.
Yeah, the size is
like,
but size and influence is slightly different.
Had so much more penetration, and by virtue of that, it's more influential.
Yeah, but by that token, you could say, I don't know, there are lots of very like influential albums that, the first Velvet Underground album, for example, barely sold any copies, but influenced everyone from Bowie, whereas, wouldn't you say the Velvet Underground are more influential than Tom Jones? Like, who's Tom Jones?
Ooh, that is dangerous territory.
But who's Tom Jones? I was just trying to think of another 60s act, but who's Tom Jones actually influenced? He sold a shared load of records. Point. But yeah, anyway, that's just by the by. But yeah, certainly an incredibly influential record.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, I guess like as we go through this podcast, we'll have more Iron Maiden albums to talk about, and we'll be able to sort of rank them against each other in some kind of top of the pops based charting.
Talking of charting, before we get to that, would you like to know what the charts were for Iron Maiden's self-titled debut and when it came out? Or even better, would you like to guess? So we're talking...
Can I get some clues as to who
So it's April 1980. I'll tell you where Iron Maiden were. Like, for a debut album, it charted at number 4. I think that's in the first week. So that is immense, right? That's for a band who weren't played on radio, particularly outside, the Radio and Rock show, I guess. Like, that's an immense achievement. So Maiden, with the self-titled album Iron Maiden at number 4. Any guess who else they might be sharing that top 10 with in April 1980?
Pretty tough, because if it was like mid to late 80s, I could give it a pretty good guess. But when you're 80, you're in the crux of the end of the 70s. Like, it's...
Well, it's interesting that we talk about punk killing metal. And the one thing I'd say about this top 10, well, punk kills hard rock and prog and metal. The one thing I would say is a little clue by this top 10 from 1980 is that if you look at what people are buying, punk has not done a very good job at killing metal or prog.
No. Okay. Then is Deep Purple in there?
No.
Duran Duran.
No.
It's probably too early for them, right?
Some of these people I've not heard of, right?
Okay. So I'm not going to get this. This is going to be upsetting.
Number
for
1
everyone.
is the greatest hits of Rolls Royce.
Okay.
Whoever Rolls Royce is.
Sure.
Number 2, an absolute banger, Duke by Genesis.
Okay.
Again, Richard sort of, throws this myth about
that's progtastic.
That is Genesis still very much in progtastic mode.
Is ELO in there anywhere?
No, you're band's equivalent.
Yes.
Number 3, you've got 12 Gold Bars by Status Quo.
Ugh.
That's all right. I don't mind. Don't hate on the Quo. Come on. 4, as we said, was Iron Maiden by Iron Maiden.
Yeah.
5, we've got the Bobby V singles album, presumably by Bobby V.
On earth is that?
Don't know. Number 6, this is where we do get a concession to punk. You've got Hypnotised by the Undertones.
Okay.
So the only punk release in the top 10, though.
Yeah.
Number 7, you've got an album called Sky 2 by an artist called Sky.
Cool.
Presumably the follow-up to Sky 1.
Sky 2, Sky Harder.
Sky, yeah, more Sky.
Yeah.
Big Sky. Number 8, you've got British Steel by Judas Priest. Good week for metal, right?
That's a good week
Maiden
for metal.
at number 4.
Yeah.
Priest at number 8. And Priest, interestingly, had been number 4 in the charts the previous week. So Maiden sort of taking Priest's spot there.
Interesting.
But British Steel came out a couple of weeks earlier.
Yeah.
Number 9, you've got Susie Quattro's Greatest Hits.
Sure.
And number 10, The Magic of Boney M.
Strong.
Right, so should we take this home? Should we do a quick man of the match?
Okay.
Best track, worst track, what I'm calling best the beast, worst the rest, and then a ranking.
Okay.
So, man of the match, who do you think, performance-wise, contribution-wise?
I mean, it has to just be Steve Harris. It can't be anyone else, right? Like, he's shepherded this band for 5 years before even making this debut. He's written most of the material. Yeah. He's been the one consistent member. I mean, I know Dave Murray's in it most of the time, but, like, it's Steve.
Yeah, and he's navigated all those lineups and taken this band
it's his vision that's led to the fruition of this album.
What was an idea in his head Christmas Day 1975 by 1980 is a band that has a 5-album deal.
Staring into a gravy boat on Christmas Day thinking, God. Jesus, if only I could play a really fast prog rock band.
So no, I'm not going to argue with you that. It's got to be Steve Harris, isn't it? Yeah. Best song or best of the beast? Worst song, worst of the rest. So let's say, were we to put one song onto a Maiden Greatest Hits playlist and one song we would just knock off out of the Maiden discography altogether, what would they be? The best?
I think Phantom of the Opera has to be the best.
Tick.
Although it's not perfect
that
to
is
me.
The correct answer.
I think it is the best song on the album. I would probably lose Strange World, I think.
Yeah, you know what?
It's just a bit of a throwaway to me.
Yeah, I was...
It's not bad. It's just kind of,
in reality, I don't think there's anything either of us would necessarily get rid of this album.
No, I just said I would get rid of Strange World.
Well, you wouldn't actually change the album, would you?
Well, I mean...
This is a hypothetical.
I'd be fine without Strange World.
If we have to get rid of something. For me, it's a toss-up between Strange World or Charlotte the Harlot, in all honesty.
I do quite like Charlotte the Harlot. I just think it's weird and not okay, but it is catchy.
Yeah, for that reason I probably would go for but Strange World I almost like because it's such an oddity in the Maiden back catalogue.
Yeah, I mean, one thing actually I meant to say earlier about this album as a whole and talking about Charlotte the Harlot reminds me of it is it's interesting that once Paul Di'Anno leaves and like Maiden hit like Maiden Mark II, they don't revisit many of these songs again in the studio, but they do re-record Charlotte the Harlot and Prowler.
Yes,
I think,
they do.
B-sides,
the 88 versions,
which
yeah.
is really interesting.
Yeah, and
there
is talk, right? Because they did this about 88. And then to celebrate their, 10-year anniversary, Maiden re-release all their singles in vinyl and CD formats.
Right.
Some of the extra bonuses were these chats of Nico McBrain. And in one of those, and I could go through and look and find my CD copy, but I'm not going to do that. But I clearly remember one of them talking about those B-sides and saying there was a plan at the time that we were going to re-record the whole of the first album.
And I think that would have been really interesting, because those re-recordings are great.
Yeah, it would have been interesting for sure, yeah. I mean,
it would have been
essential,
completely
actually.
pointless.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just think it's odd that they went with those two tracks, particularly Charlotte the Harlot.
Do you want another interesting fact about Charlotte the Harlot?
Are any of these facts interesting?
Well, I mean, I presume to the people listening to the Iron Maiden podcast, this is why you're here, right? You want this level of nerdy Maiden trivia. But they obviously not been played live in years, except at the start of the Early Days tour. So in 2005, I think about the first 5 dates, they play Charlotte the Harlot, and then they drop it out for the rest of the tour, including by the time I'd seen them, they replace it with Wrathchild.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that's interesting. I wonder why they dropped it out. Presumably, it's not gelling live? Was the fan reaction not what they thought it was? Wrathchild's a bigger song, clearly.
Wrathchild is a better song.
Well, it's a better song, but they play it live quite often.
Yeah, I know, but
it's played live a lot, Wrathchild. You know,
it's a great live song as well, though. And I guess we'll come on to that with Killers.
Well, I don't know. If we saw Maiden play Charlotte the Harlot live, we'd be like, oh my god.
Yeah, right.
Charlotte
but we're absolute nerds.
Well, yeah, exactly. But for that reason, I'm going to be contrarian. I'm going to drop Charlotte the Harlot.
Okay.
I'll keep Strange World for the novelty value of it, because it's kind of weird. But yeah, I wouldn't argue with either of those.
Fair.
So, ranking. We'll leave the rating for the time being. No, rating.
We'll rate it.
We'll leave the ranking for the time being, because we've not really got anything else to rank it with at this point.
Yeah.
So, marks out of 10.
You first.
The only possible options open to me are 10 or 9.
Are you kidding me?
No, I'm not kidding. I think.
Okay, Levin, you realise we're going to go through all the albums, and like on a relative scale, you have to have room to grow.
Yeah.
Like, unless.
But this is one of the best Iron Maiden albums. Like, this is, without wishing to preempt anything else you might say, this is easily a top 5 Maiden album for me. And a part of me thinks, well, if it's a top 5 Maiden album, surely that makes it a 10, because I reckon you could justify 10s to the top 5 best Iron Maiden albums. If I'm going to try and be critical. Also,
okay, it's going to be pointless if you just give every album 10 until we get to like the mid-90s.
I'm not. I mean, well, to be fair, you could justify
No,
that.
you couldn't.
From 1980, where we're starting to 88, you could pretty much just hand out 10s, and I won't argue.
No. I will leave this podcast.
For the reasons discussed. But I think this album, we haven't really decided this exactly as mark criteria is going to work, but you have to take into account influence, innovation, quality, and I think it scores so high.
You sound like a Calvin Klein advert.
No matter what metric.
Iron Maiden from Calvin Klein.
Innovation, quality. I don't think it needs to
smell like the East End.
But on any metric, you know what? I will take a mark off just because of Strange World and Charlotte the Harlot. I'm like, okay, I can take or leave them. But the quality of everything else is so strong. It's a 9 out of 10 album for me. 9 out of 10.
Okay, I'm going to disappoint you, I'm afraid.
Dear God.
I think it's a really good album. I think it's very important and influential album, but I also think it's got rough edges. It's not the sound of a band that's completely found their voice yet. And it's a really fascinating album for that reason alone, and you can really clearly see the hallmarks of what becomes Maiden at its best. But it's a bit rough for me, and I'm not a big fan of Paul Di'Anno's voice. I think he does a decent job, but considering what Maiden will sound like in the future, this is probably a 7.5, 7 out of 10 for me.
Oh dear God.
Yeah. I think it's a really good album, but also, you know, I'm typically pretty stingy with my ratings. So
yeah, but this is like one of the greatest metal debut albums of all time, and you're giving it a 7 out of 10.
Right, but that's because...
We're looking at, like, you know, what? Black Sabbath, Merciful, Melissa by Merciful Fate. And when I think of great metal debut albums, Iron Maiden by Iron Maiden's up there with those, like, absolute great metal debuts.
So, yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with that. I would say, though, typically for me, the debut albums of metal bands aren't usually my faves. Like, it's usually when they hit their stride a bit a couple of albums later, that's when the band clicks for me. Like, for instance, Metallica or Megadeth, like, I like their first albums quite a lot, but then their second albums are a hell of a lot better. And that's kind of how I feel about Iron Maiden. It's a precursor of great things to come, but it's not quite there yet.
You heard it here first, folks.
But hey, look, 7.5 is a good rating.
Okay.
Wow, I've really offended Blevin. Like,
direct your hate
his
mail
body
and
language
to Sam's
here.
Twitter, please, not mine. But I think it's great. Tell Sam he's wrong.
That's fine. This would be a really pointless podcast if we were just both like, 10 out of 10. They're all 10 out of 10. Even Senjutsu, they're all 10 out of 10.
Wow. Well, I don't know. I'm speechless, Sam. 7 out of 10 for one of the greatest
7.5. I get a bonus half.
Okay, well. That's a really damp note to end on. Sorry, I just feel really sad now.
Well, okay, so next episode we're going to go for Killers.
Killers, yeah, very interesting Killers.
So Killers is interesting for me in particular because I've never heard the full album before.
Okay.
So I know about half of it because, like, a bunch of those songs are staples.
Weirdly, we've spoken about quite a few of those tracks already, haven't we?
Yeah. So I'm interested to see the progression from the debut to Killers.
Yeah, or not. Well, we'll save that. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think that's probably a good point to end it then.
Excellent.
So tune in next time as we speak Killers.
Do that.
Blevin's very upset with me.
Bye.